My name is Martin Torres. I'm a senior policy analyst at the Latino Policy Forum. Thank you for joining us on a conversation on redistricting reform and Latino political power. I'd like to start by thanking Change Illinois for co-hosting this event with us, and Blue 1647 for hosting us this morning. I'm really excited because we have a tremendous set of panelists here today and a moderator who knows the Latino. For all taking time to be here this morning to participate in this important event. Most important, we have a really fun, controversial, high-stakes issue to talk about. As you know, before I turn things over to Chip, our fantastic moderator from WBEZ, I want to share a little bit about Illinois' redistricting process and talk about why we're hosting an event on redistricting 7 years before the legislature is set to readdress this issue. As you know, redistricting takes place every 10 years immediately following the federal decennial census. The state constitution gives the Illinois General Assembly the responsibility for carrying out the redistricting process for state legislative and congressional districts. In theory, Illinois' redistricting process is supposed to assume the path of any other piece of legislation. A bill is introduced, hearings are held, votes are taken in each chamber, etc. In reality, the process is anything but normal. If and when the legislature fails to pass a redistricting bill, the state constitution calls for the creation of an 8-member legislative redistricting commission to take over the process. Members of the commission are chosen via appointments made by each of the state's 4 legislative leaders: the House Speaker, the Senate President, and the 2 minority leaders. If the 8 commissioners cannot agree to a map, the state Supreme Court submits the names of 2 individuals from different political parties to the Illinois Secretary of State. The name is then randomly and publicly drawn to select the 9th member of the redistricting commission. In effect, Illinois' redistricting process becomes a winner-take-all phenomenon driven by one political party in the form of 5 appointed individuals if the legislature is unable to produce a map. In Illinois, this process has taken place 3 times since 1970, most recently in 2001. We're here today 7 years before the legislature takes up this issue because redistricting does more than create legislative district boundaries. It directly affects Latino voters' ability to influence the outcome of elections. It directly affects Latinos' ability to select candidates of their choice. It directly affects our ability to advance public policies that ensure the well-being and economic prosperities of our families. We're here 7 years before the legislature takes up this issue again because we want to be proactive and not reactive. We want our community to understand how to maximize Latino representation within the current process or to advocate for a new process that will. And while the next census is away, there's still real and meaningful conversation taking place about this issue. Earlier this year, a measure was almost placed on the 2014 ballot to amend the state constitution to create a new, less political redistricting process. And while that issue was not placed on the ballot during the midterm, there's a chance it gets on the ballot during the 2016 presidential election. The Latino Policy Forum wants for that conversation. That's why we're here today. We're here to provide you with information, analysis, and perspective. Our goal is for you to walk out of this event more knowledgeable about the redistricting process and for you to stay involved in this dialogue. Today's session is going to start with a panel discussion and then transition to a question and answer segment where you'll get a chance to ask the panelists the toughest, juiciest, most controversial questions you can think of. So without further ado, let me hand things over to Chip Mitchell, an award-winning reporter from WBEZ.
We're going to do a quick round robin with our 5 panelists here, and they're all going to answer, have a chance to answer a couple questions. So I'm going to quickly introduce them one by one. I guess what we're going to do is I'm going to introduce each panelist, and after I introduce that panelist, they'll get a chance to answer the questions. So let's, the 2 questions are, what works in today's Illinois redistricting process for the Latino community, and what does not work? And when we're talking about work, we're talking about Latino political power. And secondly, what might be a better process for both the Latino community and the state as a whole? We're going to start with Jorge Sanchez on my far right. He is a senior litigator at the Midwest Regional Office of MALDEF. That is short for the Mexican American Legal Defense and Educational Fund. He was involved in redistricting at both the city and state levels in 2011, and he's played a role in redistricting fights in other states, including Texas. So again, the question is, what works in today's Illinois redistricting process for the Latino community and what does not work? Secondly, what might be a better process for the Latino community and the state as a whole?
I know that some of the people in the audience have experience with redistricting, but I also know that some people might not. And so I wanted to present a tiny little hypothetical. Let's imagine a city that has 10 city council members, and the population of this city is 40% Latino. And with those facts alone, how many of the 10 city council seats would you all fairly think that the Latino community should get? Any volunteers or ideas of what that answer might be? 40%, so that would be 4, you would think. One would think that, yes, that population proportionality for Latinos would result in electoral proportionality for Latinos. But in fact, the way that the federal case law has developed, the law that I'm talking about is the Federal Voting Rights Act, and the cases that have interpreted the Federal Voting Rights Act. The VRA says that there won't be devices that have the effect of denying the right to vote to communities of color, essentially. And the way that that's been interpreted is it's been interpreted to affect redistricting. For other communities, for the African American community, well, for all communities, the standard that is being used instead of total population when you're remapping is the citizen voting age population standard. So this hypothetical city that I'm talking about, if it's not unlike a lot of heavily Latino cities and heavily Mexican American cities specifically, because there's obviously Puerto Ricans are citizens, and so there's a higher percentage of people who are able to vote in the Puerto Rican population. Everybody can vote who's only 18, versus in the Mexicano population, you have to be a citizen, and there's a large rate of non-citizenship among our population. And so in this particular city that I have in mind, the citizen voting age population happens to be about 16%. And so when you start talking about how many districts can you force an entity to create, it ends up being 16% and not 40%. And this is what is truly what doesn't work for Latinos, sort of generally, and it's sort of what we have to contend with when we're doing redistricting. So just stepping back from it, I don't want to get too far into the law, but so one of the things that does work for in Illinois is the fact that Latinos have managed to gain a good amount of. We have representation in the state legislature, certainly, that is unlike what we've seen in years past, and that power does translate into an acknowledgement by the people who wield power and who hold power in the state over redistricting to acknowledge it and, to a certain extent, accommodate. The problem is that when we're talking about what are the goals that are being set when they're drawing districts, they really are looking at citizen voting age population, even though it's certainly possible to create additional districts. It's not required. And one of the things that I've noticed is that legislators have gotten more astute about what the law requires. So they understand where this line is. And unfortunately, very often what we see is that they'll go right up to the line, but they very rarely cross it. They don't give you anything more than what you're quote unquote entitled to. And one of the things that's positive about it is that in some cases you can actually get more, because there's a recognition of the power recognizes that there might be a political price to pay if you don't do more than just the bare minimum. I guess the best example of this that I can give is, you should tell me what I belong to, is the city of Chicago, where Latinos are about 20% or so of the citizen voting age population. But in the last go-round, 50 aldermanic seats that were drawn, there was an agreement that 13 seats would be drawn, although somewhere between 9 and 10 were probably only required. And that was an interesting and important achievement that without having to do much of anything, the dialogue very quickly went from, oh, well, we're not going to be sticking with this baseline, we're going to go above it. Now the problem in my mind is that communities end up not having a whole lot of say about ultimately where lines get drawn, and this can be very problematic. build political power. I think the best example of this that I can think of in the recent remap was in Chicago. The Yards area. It's an area that has a historic and ongoing sort of cohesiveness politically. It's a neighborhood area that's been around for a long time. Across the population, and yet it's an area that got divided into 4 to 5 different wards. Chinatown also similarly, although there's not a sufficient population a majority Chinese ward, it got divided into 3 different wards. So you see that at times, even though the correct quote-unquote number of wards are being drawn, they're not necessarily being drawn in a way that helps and empowers Latino community to exercise their power. It's very, very difficult to get things done in a neighborhood when you have 5 different people you have to talk to, and none of those rely on that area to be elected. And I guess I will stop my comments.
And I forgot you actually ended right on time. And when we're not going to be super hardline about 5 minutes, it's kind of a target length. But when it's roughly 30 seconds to the end of 5 minutes, I'll kind of wave my hand and wave, and you can sort of start to wrap it up. But that was perfect. Okay, so next we're going to go to Mr. Victor Reyes. He is the founding partner of the lobbying and legal firm Reyes Curson. And folks here must know that he has a wealth of government experience at both the city and the state levels. He and his colleagues had a hand at both of those levels in 2011 in redistricting. So the questions again, Mr. Reyes, what works in today's Illinois redistricting process for the Latino community and what does not work? And what might be a better process for both the Latino community and the state as a whole?
Thank you. First, let me thank Sylvia Appointe for inviting me here in the Policy Forum and Change Illinois for inviting me to speak on the panel. I also want to take a moment to recognize Virginia Martinez, who's actually been involved in the redistricting fight probably longer than anyone I know, has been a real progressive leader in that front. And she along with me and we worked on the redistricting for the city council, for the Latino caucus in the city council in the most redistricting. I've been involved with redistricting as outside counsel for the city council in the year 2000 in the redistricting, the most recent one, and then at the state redistricting most recently. So I may be in a minority here today, but I believe that the political process that exists in the state of Illinois has not only benefited the Latino community, but has enhanced their opportunity for representation. And the best way that
Try this one.
Okay. Is this one any better? Okay. The best way that I can explain or show that visually is by seeing if you have that map. So, well, I don't know if you can see this at all, but if you take a look at the color coding up quickly, if you look at they're hard to see. Well, this one's better. So, the color coding shows where the population has shifted in the state from for the Latino community, which is the I think it's this map. Yes, the Latino community has shifted out. Has grown in the city and has shifted out toward the suburbs. And the same thing in the African American community, especially if you look on the purple. So if you take a look at it, if you could see this more clearly, you would see that the African American community has grown outward toward the suburbs, and the Latino community has grown in the city and also out in the suburbs. If you overlay the redistricting map, you will see that the map follows the change in the population. It turns out that this political process is aligned with where these groups tend to vote. African American, Latinos tend to vote Democratic. So it's in the interest of the map makers to follow those lines, to follow those geographics, and they end up creating what is inherently a more a map that is more favorable toward Democrats, which also has the result that is favorable toward Latino districts. During the process of redistricting, there's also this, so the Democrats realized that if they draw maps that benefit Latinos and African Americans, they draw maps that benefit Democrats. There's also an inherent compromise that has to occur between the Latino community and the African American community, which we saw during the city council redistricting, where the African American community is substantially down in the city and down in the state. The Latino community is substantially up in the city and up in the state. So the Democrats are looking to protect the gains of the African American community, enhance gains for the Latino community, and in that regard, it helps Democrats. It is true that the system is inherently a political system. That political system has, in my opinion, benefited the Latino community. Speaking to George's point, if you look at Jorge's point, if you look at Latino voting age population versus citizen voting age population, one could argue that there are more Latino legislative districts, both at the local level and at the state level, than the citizen voting age population would require. And so it is true that in my opinion, the current system has enhanced the opportunity for Latino voters. The city map and the state map has been litigated, and the court has upheld the maps, including the gains for Latinos and the preservation of the African American districts. And to one point, Mark, you should be aware that the case that creates the citizen voting age population issue in the 7th District was, in fact, at the time, one of the leaders in that regard was then Alderman Garcia, which took the Barnett case up to the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals. So in terms of what could be a better process, well, you know, in Illinois, the current political process works to benefit Latinos. I don't think the same could be said about Texas, where it's a political process that doesn't necessarily benefit the Latino community there. So if I was in Texas, I might take the exact opposite position. The only other thing I can think of that could make it potentially a better process in terms of community involvement, community participation, but it would still be an inherently political process, is if you had a process that allowed there to put maps on the ballot, where competing interests can put two maps on and let the voters decide which map they think represents the interests of the state as a whole. I don't believe in Illinois having an independent panel. I don't believe having an independent panel would guarantee the protection of the Latino community's gains and benefits in the redistricting process.
So we're going to go to Professor Jorge Chapa of the Latino Studies program of the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, also the Institute of Government and Public Affairs at the university. He's been an expert witness in at least a half-dozen court cases about redistricting and voting rights. And Professor Chapa, the questions again: what works in today's Illinois redistricting process for the Latino community? What does not work? What might be a better process for Latinos and the state as a whole?
That's fine, I don't need it. Thanks very much. I want to thank the Latino Policy Forum for inviting me and for organizing this event 7 years in advance. It's very thoughtful and foresight, and very important. And we have time to think in a blue sky a little bit. And I agree with Mr. Reyes that Illinois, I started my academic career in Texas, spent 12 years, and I worked with MALDEF closely on a number of redistricting cases. I think all of them that were occurring at the time, still ongoing. And Texas is not a good place for Latino redistricting. In fact, the opposite. Illinois, in my impression, again, I agree with Victor, that it is much better, is the opposite of Texas in terms of empowering Latinos. So certainly politics, and well, the Democratic majority did it for their own benefit, just like the Republican majority in Texas. Minimize the Latino vote for their benefit. So certainly we should be thankful for that. I mean, what we have now is a relatively good thing, but it could be better. One thing was, Well, we had five of us talking we had a conference call. There are better ways. First of all, redistricting is really complicated. I'm a demographer. The law, I study the population statistics. The law is even more complicated. I've tried to study that and just it gives me headaches. You got mapping, you got all kinds of computer work. But one thing, actually, I think what's really important to the public, the processors, one point is whatever the process is, where the rules are, somebody's going to try and game it. Some group, they're going to get together, the Democrats, the Republicans, the conservatives, Latinos, whites, they're going to game the process to their political advantage. I think one thing to do, perhaps, to minimize the tension in redistricting, by the way, when I was in the Texas courtroom for the last congressional redistricting, I counted the lawyers and estimated their hourly rate, because when lawyers take a break, they talk to expert ones, for a couple of minutes, and then they tell you, how much you billing for this? So I estimated it was costing $500,000 an hour in legal fees, and the trial went on for weeks. So it's big, and the stakes are really important, because it's a question of who's going to have political power. I think the most important thing is we have to live in a legal system in a society where it's legal to say we want to empower minorities. We want to maximize the Latino vote, or at least equalize it. One thing, looking at the Supreme Court decision since the mid-1990s, it's crazy. The law, the Voting Rights Act, was passed to empower minority voters, and now we're in a situation where you can't take race too much into account, where Chief Justice Roberts said the way to stop discriminating against race is stop thinking about race. The only person who agrees with that, as I know of, is Stephen Colbert. Just look at the headlines for the last 2 weeks. Race is a real important part of American life. We need to recognize it. We need to deal with it. And we need to say it's a good thing for minority communities to be involved in the political process. Look, Ferguson, Missouri, I think 6% of the public officials and the public employees are African American. The turnout was a very low number. If things were different. So I think it's bad that a city that's half black, has no or half Latino, has no representatives on city council and the school board, and any other public institution. We have to say that's bad, that's wrong, and that's stupid. And I think we have to say, but the problem is, the Supreme Court saying, well, that's too bad. All these complications of the law, the technology, just tie people in knots, or you can't say that. So first and foremost, we really, as a country, embrace the purpose of the Voting Rights Act and the 14th Amendment and say everybody deserves their voice. That's what democracy is. Secondly, there's lots of detail, but I guess the second point, we're going to talk about different ways to redistrict. There's benefits and I guess problems with each, but the real important thing is you need advocates like these people here who are knowledgeable, who have the power. It's tremendously, to me, complicated stuff. I've done it my whole career, and it gives me headaches. But we really need people in an open process. So we need to say, we have a clear goal. Let's make a minority representation proportional to the population. To me, that seems fair and reasonable, but I understand the law. It's illegal to say that. That's a quota, and that's crazy. And certainly we need to keep on having this conversation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next, we're going to go to Silvia Puente. She is the Executive Director of the Latino Policy Forum, our host for this event. She's also the convener of the Illinois Latino Agenda, and I should note that the Policy Forum played an important role, worked hard in the 2011 redistricting processes at both the city and the state levels. Ms. Puente.
Morning, everybody. Morning. Good to see you all. Thank you for being here. And thank you to my fellow panelists for taking up our invitation to be here as well. Well, what works for the Latino community in the redistricting process, I think, because as has already been said, the process is primarily political. The legislators who get their districts are generally happy with their districts. It includes the churches, the community centers, the key institutions that they have relationships with and that they generally want in their districts. It's certainly, given the way we do it in Illinois, and certainly that we've had a primarily blue state, we have certainly a Latino legislative caucus that has history, incumbency, tenure, leadership, which is of course essential for getting things done. Because if we don't have them in their roles, if we don't have them in leadership, it is harder to get things done. And even when it allows for some funny drawing districts that go down alleys and streets, usually it's done for a reason. So I think that there are certainly some things that work in the current redistricting process, given that I think one of its primary goals for the party in power is to draw districts that primarily benefit the Democratic Party, as has already been shared. I think, though, when we think about what would be a better process for the Latino community, if we look just at our numbers, we're 17% of the state's population, given that we have 59 people in the House, or 59 people in the Senate, twice that in the House. Proportionate representation would be 29. Now, that's not feasible because we don't have people living in close proximity to each other. The Latino population is dispersed throughout the state, and you really need people living in close proximity to each other to have that number. And then, as Jorge said, they're not all, of course, citizens. We've got a significant number of the population that's not citizen, but we also have a significant number of our population that is 18, or under 18, that are children. So I think that the key thing that we need to be thinking about is how do we draw districts that really optimize the opportunity for Latinos to elect the candidates of their choice, right? How do we, which would mean that districts are drawn with as large a Latino concentration as possible. These maps just show you the concentration of the Latino community throughout the state. So this one is by numbers, and this one is by percent. And as already been said, we can see that there's a lot of areas of the state that are turning brown, especially outside of the city of Chicago. Look all the way down here in southern Illinois. This area here, Cass County, is between 16 and 39% Latino. So we have districts, we have population all over the state. And all the demographic growth in the past decade has been outside of Chicago. Next one. And while I agree with Professor Chapa and Mr. Reyes that Illinois probably is better off in Texas in terms of what we have created in this last political process, I would argue also, as Professor Chapa said, that it's not as good as it could be. And that's what this chart tells us. What this chart tells us is that if you look pre-redistricting, and one of the things we think about, because we have those high levels of non-citizenship and we have a high level of youth, that if we really want to optimize, and this is a decision criteria and a value proposition, I would say, is that you really want to have districts that are heavily concentrated in their Latino population so that they can elect the candidate of their choice. And while it's sort of an arbitrary number, we would say that districts should be 65% or more Latino. Before redistricting in 2012, before 2010, this last process, we had 8 districts that met that criteria. We had 6 that were between 50 and 64% Latino, and 24 that would be 20 and 49. But where I would argue that we didn't do enough in terms of what could be better, we proposed a map, and we worked with a lot of coalition members and a lot of you in this room to say that you could actually create 13 state house districts that had a concentration of 65% or more Latino. And not only that, given the demographics of the state, creating that number of districts did not dilute or diminish the number of African American majority districts, which was a real feat because the Latino community grew by over 30%. And the African American population declined in the state. But we want to, of course, be sensitive to that issue. So we proposed that you could actually create 13. This meets our value proposition that you're creating the most dense Latino districts that you can, 65% or more, so that people can elect the representative of their choice. And what did we get? 7. So that's why I would argue that despite Illinois being a true blue state, despite all of our legislators who are incumbents, despite the democratic process, small d and big D, even though Illinois may not be as bad as Texas, we didn't do as well as we could have here in Illinois in creating stronger districts. Having said that, though, the trade-off was, and what we created, you can see here that we proposed 13 at 65% or more, and 4 at 50 to 64%. What we got is less densely concentrated Latino districts. Only 7 at the 65% threshold and 12 in the 50 to 64% threshold. Now, this bodes well for the future because we have a growing Latino population in the state. So these districts will likely be more concentrated by 20 when we do this again for the 2020 redistricting process. But why do we have to wait? We could have done a better job, I think, this time in creating more densely populated Latino districts. Now, having said that, another minute or so. Having said that, though, all right. Having said that, my last point, what I want to make, though, is, as has already been said, this process is complicated and complex. Because having a Latino concentrated district, whether it's at the 65% or the 50 to 64% threshold, does not necessarily mean that we will elect a Latino. And part of the process of political maturation in the state, I think not just of the maturation of the Latino community, but of the state as a whole, is that we have actually elected 3 representatives outside of Chicago from districts that have very small Latino populations. And in this last election, for the first time, we elected 2 Republican Latino legislators. Two Republican Latino legislators, right? So we're electing Republican Latinos from non-majority districts, and we still have these very concentrated districts, 64% or 65% or more, where we have elected non-Latinos to represent us, right? So I want to just end by saying, I think that's probably a good thing because it doesn't just mean that the only way we elect individuals is if we have a district that's 65% or more. That's part of our political maturation of not just the Latino community of the state as a whole, but we're not going to be able to elect the optimal number 2, in which we could potentially elect the individuals of our choice if we don't have those more densely concentrated districts.
Awesome charts and maps get you a couple extra minutes. All right. So we're going to go to Ryan Blitzstein. He's the president and CEO of Change Illinois. That is a politics and government reform coalition. His organization has been at the forefront of efforts to overhaul Illinois redistricting, including a campaign called Yes for Independent Maps that nearly got redistricting reform on this November's ballot. I also have to mention as a journalist that Ryan is a former journalist for Times, New York Times, and Bloomberg Businessweek. And I'm going to remind everyone of the questions. What were 2 questions? And this is the last panelist addressing them. What works in today's Illinois redistricting process for the Latino community, and what does not work? What might be a better process for both the Latino community and the state as a whole? Ryan.
Thank you, and thanks everyone for being here and to all the panelists for joining. I'm going to be brief because I feel like a lot of what I was going to say has been said, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I think it's clear that the current process overall has been good for the Latino community and political power. You see just a general steady uptick in the number of Latino representatives and the number of districts overall over the last several redistricting processes where the Latino community is able to make its voice heard. But I think there's a lot of serious downsides to the process. A big one, of course, is that it's behind closed doors. So yes, there are some hearings. Yes, people can advocate. Yes, there are some groups that are well connected that can get into the map room. But basically it's done by a handful of people in leadership of whatever party is in power. I think that the Latino community and all communities of color right now are very reliant on the goodwill of leadership currently in the Democratic Party. It might be that in 2020 we still have a Republican governor and that he vetoes the maps and you draw a name literally out of a copy of Abraham Lincoln's hat and it's a Republican name. And it's not clear to anyone here, based on what happens in Texas and other states, that the Republican Party would be as generous as the Democratic Party has been. I think right now it really is a protection racket. There's just no question. 2/3 of legislators face no challenger this year. You had Speaker Madigan during the campaign last year pushing against reform of redistricting, literally calling nonprofit groups, some of whom received state money, into a room and telling them that they needed to be against redistricting reform, calling in the Latino caucus, saying you need to be against redistricting reform. It's the opposite of how government should work. Government should be, we elect people that represent us, we advocate for what we want, and they listen to us and do their best, as Sylvia said, optimize the interests of the community. Instead, you have people in power just continuing their power. Again, in some ways, you've seen this benefit the Latino community, particularly incumbent Latino legislators, but it really isn't sustainable, and clearly, this is better than what you see in Texas in terms of Latino representation. But if you look at another process, say California or Arizona, California did this after many of the same sorts of debates. They did a reform that made things independent, transparent, so no longer behind closed doors, nonpartisan, not just bipartisan, but including independents in the process, making it totally open. And lo and behold, the Latino community doubled the number of representatives that they had in their caucus. And again, that's not to say that any process and any change would create a sea change for the Latino community. It is to say that if you open things up, you make things more competitive, and you make things more transparent, that it's possible that the Latino community could gain more power in this state that is much more aligned with the strong growth of the population.
Thank you, Mr. Blitzstein. Okay, we're going to open up questions from the audience to panelists. But first, we want to recognize and invite to speak, just for a couple minutes each, two people in the audience. First is State Representative Mike Fortner of West Chicago. He is a leading Republican on the issue of redistricting. And I'll also mention that he won a redistricting mapping competition for the state of Ohio. So, Representative Fortner, a few words from you.
Thank you very much. I'll try and stay in a place, hopefully, that won't get the feedback from the speakers. I think it is great to see all of you here interested in this issue. Far too often, because redistricting is a once every decade proposition, people get really fired up right at the time of the census through redistricting, and then everyone kind of goes to sleep on the issue.
You should probably step a couple.
This way, thank you. People kind of go to sleep then for the next decade until the next census comes around. And it misses the chance to learn from exactly the questions that Chip's been asking. What works, what hasn't worked? I think one of the things very important to the Latino community is, as Sylvia pointed out, there was this 30% growth in the population over the last decade. Not clear, at least certainly in terms of what the Latino Policy Forum was looking for, that was translated effectively. We also heard during hearings a lot about the integrity of certain neighborhoods. They wanted to try to keep them together so they could have a clear voice to the legislators that represented them. In many cases, the map that came out, though they had a chance to make their pitch in public hearings, that didn't always translate. That process had a gap between what the public was asking for and what found its way into the map as it was eventually approved. So, having this dialogue, having this forum, I think is really important, even in the middle of the decade, so that we can be thinking about what the needs for 2020 will be. On one final note, the most recent release of census estimates has put the population of Illinois overall has grown by about 40,000 people since the 2010 census. The Latino population has grown by about 90,000 over that same 3-year period. You can do the math. Without the Latino population and their continued impact in Illinois, Illinois would be declining in population today. Thanks.
Thank you. Representative Mike Fortner of West Chicago. We're going to also hear just a few words before we open questions up from the audience to the panelists. From Virginia Martinez, we have here in the audience. She's with the Illinois Latino Family Commission. She helped set up MALDEF's office in Illinois, and she played a leading role in the very first Latino suit about redistricting City of Chicago wards. This was back in 1981, and really this began the modern era of Latino political representation in the state of Illinois. Virginia, pleasure to have you here. Right in the middle.
Yes. Thank you. I wanted to mention a couple of things that were referred to. No one has really talked a lot about the word gerrymandering, which is what bad things happen in redistricting. So I want to go back to 1980 when MALDEF opened. I was living 2 blocks away from here, and the city council, which had no Latinos in it at the time, drew the line at Ashland between the 1st Ward and the 25th Ward. So you know automatically what that meant to this community. We did not have the numbers that we needed in either one of those wards to elect a representative of our choice. The same thing was going on at the state legislature, where the community was divided, not only in Pilsen, but on the northwest side. So neither the Puerto Rican community nor the Mexican community had an opportunity to elect people that we wanted to elect. It was challenged. We told them, if you do this again, we will sue. They didn't know, maybe they didn't know who MALDEF was, I don't know, but we did sue and we won. So the number one interest in redistricting is incumbency. No matter what color or political party is represented, they're trying to keep their seats. And what stops the actual gerrymandering that we've seen in the past is the threat of lawsuits. So it's not pure benevolence on behalf of the Democrats or the Republicans that have increased the number of Latino districts in the state and in the city council. It is the fact that MALDEF is always there keeping an eye on and saying, if you do this, we will sue. And having other advocates involved now with and trying to keep it more public. The reality is it gets done behind closed doors, always does, and as long as that happens, the public does not have a voice.
Okay, if you didn't hear that, the mic went out. It was lawsuits and the threat of lawsuits. Is this one? All right. I'm going to hand this over. You guys can pass that around. Okay, so we can take questions from the audience. You can address a particular panelist, though we'll give everyone a chance to answer. I will ask the panelists to, if somebody has already made your point, let's just keep the discussion moving and move on to the next question. And we'll sort of all take turns. So if you've spoken a lot on one question, maybe see if somebody else has got something to say first. Okay, so from the audience. Yes, sir.
Yeah, well, I just want to say it's an honor to follow a great fighter like Virginia Martinez, who has done a lot to protect the voting rights of the Latino community as well as all the citizens of Chicago. And we really appreciate everything she's done in the past. She is a hero. I think you need to recognize her as a hero and give her what she deserves. My name is Bruce Crosby. I've been involved in redistricting since about 1980, and my recent experience was with the City of Chicago and the Cook County Board. We dabbled a little bit in the legislative, but what we found is that the serious issue to Black and Hispanic empowerment is on the local level. It's not really on the state legislative level. So I think it's very important for you all to concentrate on the local level. Don't get tricked and fooled thinking you're going to cover Illinois. Take care of Chicago and Cook County. That's where the Latino power base is, and that's where it can grow and flourish. We have a problem in our community as well as your community. We can't trust our advocates. people who claim that they're fighting for us, like the NAACP. I even question Waldorf in terms of the way they handle themselves in the last redistricting process. I don't think they worked in the best interest of the Latino community in the last process. Also, our elected officials, they're dominated by the Democratic Party. So in turn, we're getting a Democratic Party map, not a map for Latino empowerment, not a map for black political empowerment. Why can't we get all those 65% districts? Because it's not in the interest of the Democratic Party. The 15th ward, do you know that they put Latinos in the 15th ward, turned it from a black majority ward to a Latino majority ward? Unnecessary. The Latino population is there. It didn't need to come into the 15th ward. That's on the local level. They're manipulating the Latino community against the black community. And we can't trust the elected officials. So we, and I'm blessed, I may not even be here in the next report. I'm blessed. I saw it in 80, I saw it in 90, I saw it in 2000, I saw the last one, but I may not be here for the next one. So it's important that we look at the next one and develop the independent leadership in our community. Don't depend on the elected officials. They're not your friends. They're Mike Madigan's friends. They're Daley's friends, but they're not the friends of the Latino community. And never forget it. They're not going to give you a map that's in your best interest. They didn't do it in this reapportionment, and they've never done it in any reapportionment. So it's up to our communities to develop community leadership. Don't depend on the elected officials. Don't depend on MALDA, because they play politics with you as well. That map for the county and that map for the city are terrible. And why didn't MALDA draw a 50-ward map? Why just a Latino map? If you're going to draw a map for the city of Chicago or for the state of Illinois, you need to draw all the districts. So when they tell you they just joined the Latino districts, watch them, because they're not your friends.
Thank you, sir.
Conclusive, you have to draw a whole map. So I want you all to understand that. Be on guard. Don't trust a lot of these people. Protect yourself. Know it's the best interest of the Latino community. Get your majority. Don't compromise. 65%, you want it. Not 50%, not 55%.
Okay, that's a pretty clear message, and we're going to have the panelists respond to that. Thank you so much, sir.
So I certainly want to endorse and support the notion of we really need community empowerment, and we need all of all of you here in order to be able to have a map that is more reflective, I think, certainly given the data that we showed. I also want to share, and we were really pleased that the coalition that the Latino Policy Forum convened with the Latino Agenda worked with United Congress, which was a multiracial, multi-ethnic coalition. So it was certainly in my recent history, while there have been conversations between the African American and Latino community in past redistricting efforts, this was probably the most cohesive I've ever seen it in this last redistricting efforts, and it really is thanks to the United Congress. But what was also interesting, I think, to your point, Mr. Crosby, is that we saw two competing coalitions. We saw two competing multiracial, multi-ethnic coalitions on this last redistricting process. One that said we can create these number of districts that I showed you and not dilute Latino voting and not dilute African American voting strength. And then another competing coalition that said, oh, no, the status quo or what was being presented was fine. So I want to support and endorse that there really is, it is important for our communities to be able to work together. So thank you for sharing that.
Anyone else want to respond?
I thank you for your comments to Mr. Crosby. I do want to make clear that MALDF actually did submit two full 50-ward maps. We submitted to the city clerk, and certainly the beginning of the process was drawing Latino wards in mostly Latino areas. Partly that has to do with the fact that it's a recognition that we don't represent the African American community, and understanding that to a certain extent that community should be figuring out for itself what the map should look like. Our maps look decidedly different, both in terms of African American wards that we drew as well as the Latino wards that we drew. Of course, our map wasn't voted on. The way the city council process works is if you have any 10 aldermen, they can present a map, and if there's a competing map, it does get put to referendum. They managed to get 8 votes against it, and unfortunately came 2 votes shy of any other alternative. I do think that, I guess I'll leave it at that for the moment.
That was Jorge Sanchez of MALDEF. Before that, we heard from Silvia Puente of the Latino Policy Forum. Who else would like to respond? All right. Next question, ma'am.
Thank you. My name is Ruth Greenwood. I'm with the Voting Rights Project at the Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. And one of the things that you mentioned, Sylvia, but I was actually addressing this question to everybody, was that the Latino community is growing outside of Chicago and Cook County. And it feels to me like it's becoming no longer a discrete and insular minority, but it's becoming sort of a disparate minority group, and in some senses less homogenous in political views than the African American community. And so it seems to me that something like instant runoff voting, it's called in the Illinois Constitution, or ranked choice voting, is an appropriate remedy, particularly if you have multi-member districts, to ensure that people from a particular community, so the Latino community spread all across a county or a district, are able to vote together for a candidate of their choice. And to me, it feels like it would give better representation than the traditional remedy under the Voting Rights Act of having single-member districts, because if you can't draw a single-member district, you could still get representation through IRV. So I wondered whether there was any support for that on the panel with respect to Latino representation and generally minority representation.
Who'd like to go first?
Can you say a little bit more about what IRV is?
Oh, I'm sorry. So instant runoff voting is you rank the first person that you want to vote for, and then second, third, fourth, fifth, such that if the person that you vote for doesn't get enough votes, you move to that person's second preference. So, for example, the easiest example to use in a single person being elected is in 2000, Gore and Bush and Nader were all running. If all the people that wanted to vote for Nader put it as their number 2 vote, Gore, then they would have kicked out the Nader votes because he got the least amount of votes in, say, Florida. And all of those votes would have transferred to Gore as the second choice. And it would have meant, in that case, that people on the left and the far left could eventually coordinate around a specific candidate. And my thinking with respect...
Or maybe Nader would have won.
Exactly, who knows? But my thinking with respect to the minority communities, and in particular, looking at whether there are crossovers between the African American and the Latino communities, it would mean that you wouldn't need to have Black and Latino voters fighting for their own candidates. They could each vote number 1 for who is their candidate of their choice, but put number 2 to a separate minority candidate of choice, and ensure that you get representation for the minority community rather than splitting the vote.
So who'd like to speak in response?
I'll take a quick.
Okay. Mr. Reyes of Reyes Gerson.
So the concept of multi-member districts is interesting. I don't think the voters have an appetite for more politicians, and so you probably would end up having to have a system where you have fewer districts with multi-members, which could allow for that, but eventually those multi-member districts would be almost just a replacement for the number. We have so many legislative districts, both at the city council level and at the state level, but that is a way to ensure participation of not just a racial minority, but of a political, meaning a policy minority, whether it's conservative or moderate or Democrat. So I think something like that could be interesting. I think it's a better alternative than putting the redistricting process into the hands of an unelected, unaccountable panel.
Who else? Professor Jorge Chapa, University of... Nope.
I'd like to say something.
Okay, Ryan Blitzstein.
So thanks for bringing that up. I think it's important to note that we used to have multi-member districts. We got rid of them with the cutback amendment in 1981. If you talk to the policy wonks, they would say that one unintended, very negative consequence of that is that we have fewer sort of coalitions being built across the aisle than we used to. Pat Quinn, soon-to-be ex-governor, led the movement for that. I do think there is a downside in terms of accountability that, as Victor said, that people don't have an appetite for more politicians, and if I've got 3 representatives instead of just 1, there's a challenge there. It works in a lot of other states and a lot of other countries, so it's certainly worth looking at. And just to respond briefly to Victor's point on, do you want to have legislators do it or an unelected, unaccountable board? I do think it's worth pointing out that no other major Western country does it in the blatantly political partisan way we do redistricting. It's actually illegal to do gerrymandering in the UK. Here it's totally legal and totally normal. The idea that these nonpartisan commissions are unaccountable and the legislators who 2/3 of them don't face a challenger and only a handful of percentages of them actually face any sort of competition are accountable. Just, it doesn't really fit in with the facts. So I think it's important to, not to say that one plan is perfect and another plan doesn't work at all, but it's important to look at the idea that these commissions that have Republicans, Democrats, and folks who aren't part of either party, they work very, very well in states like California, Arizona, and they work in countries throughout the world to make sure that communities of color are well represented, that minority political party and policy interests are well represented, and that most important, all citizens throughout a state or a city or a country can hold representatives accountable.
Okay, that was Ryan Blitzstein of Change, Illinois. Sir, do you have a question?
Yes, question and a statement. My name is Will Crosby. I as well worked in 1980 to draw a map. Prior to 1980, I worked with a group called the Illinois Migrant Workers. I remember we set up here on 18th Street and turned the organization over to the Latino community when black workers stopped doing outside work on farms in Illinois. And so I have a real problem with today. I'm really upset because I think the Latino community has failed to respect its relationship with the black community and has used racial politics against the black community to further the Latino community's situation. And I'll tell you why I say that. I went to MALDEF, reached out for a black-brown coalition. I am a map drawer. I've never tried to run for office ever. I went to Virginia Martinez in the county case and tried to find and develop a coalition, trying to reach out to keep this black-brown coalition, because I was there in 80, and I knew what the Latino community didn't have. And I've been working on a black-brown coalition from the Rudy days. If y'all know who Rudy is, maybe y'all know. Okay, because I come out the student movement of Chicago. I'm a Chicagoan. So when I come into this meeting and I don't see a black person sitting on your panel, I know you have no respect for the black community. When it comes to redistricting, the black community defined the relationship of voting rights. This was a fight that we took on when nobody was with us. Nobody was riding with us when we started this voting rights fight. We went and got Cesar Chavez and brought him into the process. We said, look, they're doing the same thing in your community, doing in our community. So to hold a meeting like this and then have the gross disrespect not to have a black person on your panel to have a discussion about voting rights, something that we defined, and you've been able to get more for our work, and then not have the respect. See, because I've been coming on 18th Street since 1966. I've ate many tacos, homemade tacos right here in alleys on 18th Street. I've ate off garbage cans in Pilsen. I went to school on 14th and Newberry at Malcolm X College. So I have an intense relationship coming inside. I know this to be from the barrio. You're one of the barrio boys. I understand what that means. So to have this kind of meeting, and when you talk about Latino, it's not just in Mexico, it's Puerto Rico, is 80. Those are black people. I don't see them in this room. So it's like immigration discussion. You have an immigration discussion, but it's all about Latino, but you don't talk about they steal from Africans when they try to come to America. Or I never forget when the black Mexicans I'm trying to help get up in here couldn't get into America. Folks come to 18th Street, you remember? So we act like the black folks ain't in Mexico. 3 million of us in Mexico. Okay, so when I come to this kind of meeting, I think we have to have a respect for communities. So when he talked about the 15th Ward, I didn't see a Latino stand up about why are you pushing us into the black community, taking our community, which is, the 15th Ward was a voting rights case. Hear me now. 10 years before, the 15th Ward was a black vote. It was Marquette Park. If you don't know what Marquette Park is, it's where Martin Luther King marched. It's where the Nazi Klan lived. And the Latino community allowed this mayor and this city council to remove that black ward. And you didn't stand up for black people. So yes, I came here today with an attitude because I think the Latino community is grossly disrespecting a longtime friend. I hear people talk about chewing brown-black coalition. There's no brown-black coalition any longer. Not because the black people have not reached out, it's because Latino people have chosen to go with the powers that be. Years they spent with Daley. I say you got money for it, but at the same time, look at Pilsen today. And I give you 10 more years, you won't be in Pilsen. Because in America, it's racial politics. Let's don't be fooled.
And it's Will Crosby's your name, sir?
I'm with the Committee to Preserve Voting Rights. Okay. I, as well as Virginia Martinez, Carol Mosey Brown, Richard Dick Newhouse in 1980, under a suit called, I experienced gerrymandering.
All right.
Michael Madigan came on my block, came down my block, took me off my block, took my street in Chicago, Illinois, and put me in Worth, Illinois. In the last redistricting case, did the state legislature? You allowed that. Mm-hmm. If you worked on it, you allowed it. They gerrymandered me. So my district was an Irishman from Worth, Illinois, and I live in a black community. I'm through.
Thank you. We're going to start with Sylvia Puente.
Sure. So, sir, thank you for your comments, and let me certainly say that we intended no disrespect, and I regret that I regret that you feel that way, and please understand that our intention was not to be disrespectful, but I understand that you feel that way. Having said that, what I would like to suggest and offer is a broader understanding that there is not unanimity in the Latino community either on the redistricting process. And I think we've talked about some of that up here on the panel. So when you were speaking about the Latino community, same way that you have all the different political allegiances, alliances, and relationships in the African American community, that certainly exists in the Latino community as well. So that not all, we have certainly different political points of view even within the Latino community. And I'd like to just offer that I hear your concerns and how some of them were not addressed, but the Illinois Latino Agenda, which is a coalition of nearly 50 organizations, did work hand in hand with African American leadership through the United Congress in proposing maps for the 2011 redistricting process at the State House level, not at the city level to the degree that we would have liked, and certainly not at the county level, but certainly at the State House level. So is it perfect? No. Was it an honest partnership of really trying to say, how do we ensure that there is Latino representation and African American representation is not diluted? Yes. So did that have an audience? Was that map accepted? Yes.
I keep hearing people say that the black population is failed. In Chicago, the black population is 47% of the voting age population is majority African American. Mm-hmm. We were 2.3 million black people in Chicago before they removed 1.6 million black people from Chicago. Let me say this again so people don't know. Under Richard Daley, 1.6 million black people were removed from Chicago. That's called racial steering. It's called when you take, they create a program called special taxing district behind Midway Airport for the white community to move out, and then the stop the black community from moving in, because the black community is moving in, they move all the Hispanics in the Midway corridor. Guaranteed home equity, you may know it. And so when you got these kind of programs that take place, they manipulate your community. And they're doing things in your community that you think that, oh, well, they're before. No. America has a history of racial steering. They steer you in Chicago. I can tell you when I grew up in Chicago, I remember the Puerto Rican community was on the south side of Chicago in Hyde Park. And they took the Puerto Rican community and moved it to the northwest side, all the way off the south side of Chicago. Okay? I remember when South Chicago was majority Polish, and all of a sudden they steered the Hispanics into South Chicago. So it's a steering program. And I want you to be real clear that people are manipulating racial steering and the thing that, because they got me today, they won't come get you tomorrow.
Okay. We understand that. Thank you for offering your perspective. We appreciate your opinion. And again, let me offer my apologies if you feel disrespected, because certainly that was not our intention. Thank you.
I just want
Ryan
to
Blitzstein.
add briefly, Mr. Crosby, I really appreciate what you said in particular, that it was the African-American community who really pushed the voting rights agenda in this state and many others, and really brought in representation for communities of color in general, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and on up until today. Change Illinois is actually doing a series of events focused on voting rights and communities of color. The next one we're doing is going to be in late January with the Chicago Urban League.
Nobody to redistrict. The reason I say that, I had these people say you were redistricting. And if I ain't seen you in the map room, then you wasn't seriously dealing with redistricting. And can't nobody sit here and tell me it was a public map room that you couldn't go in and ask the question. So I differ when people tell me, well, you don't know what's going on. You can play stupid, okay? Or you can be involved and shit. If you want to shit, see, I miss people like Rudy, because he was genuine.
You're talking about Rudy Lozano.
You know what I'm talking about. He was genuine. He was a movement person. I don't know what exists today of the people. Because your word should be your bond, and your respect for another community's upliftment should be your bond. I ain't never had no downliftment for no other community. I just want mine to be up, and I want yours to be up, because it's be up. All of us should be equal in America. Nobody should be dogged out. And so when I see they let you play to dog and help you to dog you out, I said, you ain't the majority. No, it ain't about black against Hispanic, which they try to keep throwing in my face. Oh, your population's been lost. No. You removed my population. It was the Katrina that nobody wants to talk about that took place in Chicago. When you remove 1.6 million black people from a city, and nobody sits there and says a word about it. When you got a community that every time a house goes vacant, you tear it down, nobody has nothing to say about it. When you murder our children, nobody has a, they murder us today, but guarantee you this, and hear me well. What you see how to be today, it's going to have to be twice as much tomorrow.
All right.
They probably did to you once before, if you know your history.
Mr. Crosby, thank you so much. We're going to go to another question.
Hi, good morning. My name is Maria Salazar. I'm from Northside Community Resources. So in the 2012 election, I was working in the 8th, 9th, and 10th congressional districts doing nonpartisan get out the vote. And I thought it was really interesting, the maps that were shown, because as you can see, a lot of the growth happened in areas like Lake County, which when they were redistricted included in the 10th congressional district, like Round Lake, and that's exactly where we were working. So I'm wondering, as we talk about, it seems like on the one hand we have this fight for remapping, right, and making sure that it's representative of the communities that actually live there. And on the other hand, it seems like we're also tackling this issue of the citizen voting age population. I'm wondering if you see this as a fight that goes hand in hand, like we have to get those who are citizens and voting age registered to vote, or if there's, we should be focusing on remapping first and then do that. I'm just curious to get your thoughts as how we can do it, especially in areas outside of Chicago where, the Latino population is increasing significantly.
So who'd like to answer first?
Go ahead.
Okay. Jorge Sanchez of MALDEF.
I think that in addition to registering people and getting them to vote, I think focusing on youth is extremely important. I think that studies show that when people start voting at 18 and they continue to vote, they will continue to vote the rest of their lives. That's one thing. The other thing for the Latino community is increasing the numbers of citizens that we have. There have been in the past quite large efforts aimed at creating more citizens, and that's extremely important as well. One other thing that I would propose as a somewhat radical idea is enfranchising non-citizens. We were out in Round Lake last night in a community that is, the schools there are more than 50% Latino, 25% English language learners, and this district has pretty much decided that they don't want to comply with state law as it affects Latinos, as it affects mostly Spanish-speaking English language learners. And there is absolutely no way that a 14% citizen voting age population base is ever going to have a significant effect on that school board. Were you to actually enfranchise the parents of the children who are in these school districts, that could change things. And there actually are precedents for non-citizens voting in different municipalities and in the country. It's not constitutionally prohibited.
Victor Reyes.
So the answer is yes. You have to help Latinos become citizens, and then they have to be engaged. I'm Mexican born of a Puerto Rican father, and so when I was living in Mexico, voting was compulsory. I don't know if it still is. So you had numbers in the 80s and 90% turnout of voters. In Puerto Rico, everybody there's highly political. They all vote all the time, so they have high voting rates there. Somehow the voter turnout is really what really has to change. Even in crossover districts, even in districts where Latinos are a large minority, the impact of the political power can only be translated as if they come out to vote, and that can only be done through education, citizenship, and those types of things.
I'll say one thing. Thank you.
This is Professor Jorge Chapa, University of Illinois.
Thank you. I guess on both. I mean, certainly, I agree with I think it's a great question, great point. In terms of giving the franchise non-citizens, that's a great idea. It doesn't sound like it's going to go very far. But here, I did a study when I moved back to Illinois. I grew up here. With then Senator Miguel del Valle, looking at school board elections. 1% of Illinois school board members are Latino. And you got to put that in the context of the single biggest predictor of a school district that's going to have success with Latino students is having a Latino or Latino school board member. So I did this study, and it's a long story, but I talked to a member of the Chicago School Board, and he said, they asked him, what do you think? And the obvious thing is, especially for school board elections, there have been immigrant voters in the past. Because we have a huge Latino school-age population in Illinois, and in many school districts are not doing very well because with 1% Latina school board members, there aren't enough to go around. But he said, even if you just get immigrants to be on the school board. It makes, who cares? Those are the parents. Most in the typical demographic pattern of these districts, these areas with large Latino growth, immigrants come in, their children, they're born, typically U.S.-born children, go to school, but their parents can't be politically active for them. So certainly some kind of change in that regard would be great. And even in terms of alternative voting schemes, they sound good. I'm all for it if they work. I was working the case in Ohio. But anyway, but some alternative voting scheme where you can get a dispersed population like Latinos are outside of the Chicago metro area and still have a chance of electing to represent not only Latinos but other minorities too, really empowering minorities and getting away from geographically based districts, which are legally difficult and often don't work either.
Okay, Sylvia.
I would just add that, yes, we have to do both. We only have the opportunity to redraw the maps every decade, and in between, we have to be doing more to both increase citizenship as well as voter turnout. Though I want to underscore that there's 30 districts currently in Illinois that have, at the state level, that have between 20 and 64% Latino population. So a district still doesn't have to be a supermajority for us to have influence. 20% of a district is significant. It's how do we organize to have influence on our non-Latino legislators as well. One of the initiatives that we have working with the Illinois Latino Family Commission is that we've done a Latino Unity Day in Springfield for the past several years. And we do a legislative breakfast in Springfield. And our Latino colleagues in the legislature have said, our non-Latino legislators need to better understand the Latino community because they see a growing Latino presence in their districts. So we do have to work to organize that, to be more organized in those districts, even when they're not supermajority. And we've also got to register and turn out people to vote. Because the sad truth, folks, is that there's more non-Latinos who are eligible to vote that didn't vote than did vote. We could double our capacity in political power if everyone that was eligible to vote voted. But we're seeing apathy in the Latino community the same way we're seeing apathy across all voting segments. And then the last thing I want to say is, and especially those of you that work with youth groups, we have over 30, I think it's even 35,000 Latinos that turn 18 in this state every year. Right? So there are so many areas of work to engage, to register, to engage, to motivate, to turn out if we're really going to get our political power. Because I'll be really frank, and this is an honest statement, you know, you can see the Latino Policy Forum is a little frustrated with what didn't happen in Springfield, you know, but it's on us to be able to do the voter registration and the voter turnout across all of our community organizations across the breadth if we want to optimize our political presence, strength, and power.
Okay, that was Sylvia Puente, Latino Policy Forum. Is that it? Okay. We're going to take these two questions here, but first I want to ask folks, everyone has got an evaluation form on your seat, and before you leave, if you're going to leave, before we're done especially, just take a second, fill that out. Okay, your question.
Hi, my name is Beatrice Medina. I'm a clinical doctoral student of psychology, and this is the first time that I attend something like this, so it's a very invigorating experience, and I've considered myself to be somebody who's very dedicated to serving, you know, the Latino population, and in terms of, you know, outreach and in terms of helping those who need the help and voicing for those who don't have a voice. And so I guess my question for the panel is, what kind of efforts and or suggestions do you guys have for somebody who's a budding professional who's starting, you know, to kind of see the way that things are working, not only on a political scale, but just, you know, on a community-based level? Because I do feel that we may do all this work, and my fear is that we do all this work, but then there's a disconnect between the community and going out and voting, and going out and actually being trustful of the people who are going to represent us, because I feel that there's such a disparity and such a distrust for those who are in power, who those are even maybe just one layer above us or one level above us. And so I guess what kind of efforts are being done in that aspect to kind of repair that distrust and that disconnect?
Go first.
Here's my motto from Teddy Roosevelt: do what you can where you are with what you have. Whatever it is, I don't know where you live or where your professional career will take you. The fact that you're asking this question is great. You can make a contribution in any area. Get on the school board. That would be a great area for you, where you could run for school board. You could go to school board meetings. Get involved with your community, you know, wherever, not only where you live, but your professional community. You know, I would teach Latino studies at the University of Illinois, and we're going to bring a speaker in next semester. a recruiter for the Central Management Service of the state. Because again, I would tell the students, if you work for the state, first of all, they're hiring, not many people, they're firing too, but still, it's a career path, but it's not only a good job for them, but in their capacities. Latinos are underrepresented in every area of public employment, public service, public policy. Having Latino, like I said, the 1% school board member is not enough. It really is a major factor in Latino educational failure. And by the way, I mean in large numbers. Whatever your skills, whatever capacity your degree and your training will give you, there's going to be a place where you can make a contribution. So, there's not, you don't have to make a major change, but you don't have to move, you don't have to change careers. But whatever you are, you're going to be able to make whatever area you're in, Latinos will be underrepresented. Go there, be a loud voice, be an advocate, and I think you'll make a great change.
Okay, that was Professor Jorge Chapa, University of Illinois.
Oh.
Who's next?
So thank you for being here then. It's great that you're here. So a few practical, I think Jorge's answer was great, but the part of do what you can where you're at, my definition of as leader is that as long as you can bring someone along with you, that makes a difference. So if you're a registered voter, you get your family to register to vote, you get their friends to register to vote, that's the first step, right? Now to help you do that, the Latino Policy Forum and the Illinois Latino Agenda is committed to doing candidate questionnaires. We did one for the last mayoral election. We did one for this gubernatorial election. We will plan to do one for the next mayoral election. So get on our website, get on our email list. We will be putting out information on all the political candidates that respond to our questionnaire. So it's another way of keeping someone like you informed. And then, of course, network a little bit here, network with us. There's lots of different organizations that are doing voter registration campaigns, that are doing citizenship campaigns. We're going to need a whole lot of volunteers in these next steps of deferred action once this starts moving forward, of helping people process their paperwork. There's volunteer training sessions going on to help people do that. So there's lots of ways to get engaged and to stay connected. And so thanks for being here to do that.
Anyone else?
Thank you.
Okay, our last question, Alden.
Hey, Chip, how you doing? Alden Lowry with the policy unit of the Better Government Association.
And a former journalist.
Well, I'd like to think not former, but yeah, in my current capacity, not a journalist. But there were a couple of things that were mentioned. First, thanks for having this. The conversation has been great. A couple of things that I heard that I was curious about with regard to the Yes for Independent Maps campaign, and at least there's still an ongoing movement to consider redistricting reform in some fashion in the future. With regard to that, I've got actually two questions, two quick questions. One is, how do we ensure that whatever redistricting movement going forward will ensure that the prospects and the concerns of the Latino community will be dealt with responsibly with whatever body that might be doing redistricting in the future if reform does happen? The second question is, I heard an acknowledgement from a number of panelists that the current form has, and in some respects, the Latino community has done well under the current format, and that the party in power, so long as it meets their interest and the Latino community's interest, they're in lockstep to some degree. So if changing the current process would mean taking the party in control, the Democratic Party, take that redistricting power out of their hands, will there or can there be complete buy-in from the Latino community for a redistricting process that is going to be different from what we have right now?
Okay, Victor Reyes.
So maybe I can take a shot. So I want to make a couple of observations. I don't completely agree with Sylvia's statistics about what could have been done. I think the information it could be. It's legally dubious, right? Given the Seventh Circuit's position on citizen voting age population, creating districts of that many could create a problem. Number one. Number two, I had a quick conversation with the speaker, letting him know I was going to come and talk to the panel and get his thoughts. And he said, Vic, current movement is, in his opinion, a Republican-funded movement that when the Republicans were winning state legislative districts, they didn't have an interest in changing the process. And now that they're somehow unable to win these legislative districts, they want to change the processes. So, my concern, my biggest concern with the proposed amendment is that there is no, I trust the courts, and what Virginia spoke about earlier, I think is correct. The courts and what MALDEF does, I trust that they, as vigorous advocates in protecting the rights of minorities, will yield a better result than, again, an independent, unaccountable panel.
I actually think that you could increase Latino population without being subject to Section 2 challenge. The problem is that the law doesn't require you to do so, and you have this, the ceiling becomes the floor becomes a ceiling problem for Latinos. I think that there has to be a process that looks at the outcome of political reform and what effect that has on litigation. I did not speak very publicly about this particular objection to the last proposed reform, but one of the things that it did was potentially create a cause of action by somebody because of geography. Let's say I live in Melrose Park and you carved the Latino part of Melrose Park to create a state legislative district. Well, at least the way I interpret it under the language that was proposed, if I lived in the white part of Melrose Park, I actually had a claim now that I never would have had before under federal law. And I was explaining to Representative Fortner actually this before this today, that when you are a defendant intervener in a lawsuit, let's say we were defending a lawsuit, you can intervene as a party and say, okay, well, we like the map. We want to help defend it. Well, if you win a case like that, you don't get attorney's fees. And the people who fund voting rights litigation are the parties. It's both parties, frankly. And both of them have very deep pockets, much deeper than MALDEF, I'll tell you that. And so to extend resources of organizations like ours, putting out fires where everybody who didn't used to have a cause of action under federal law. I mean, in the past, both Democratic and Republican parties have been able to find Latino and black plaintiffs to bring voting rights challenges using Section 2. What this would have done is no longer require them to have a person of color as a stand-in to bring a suit, and I think, could have created, frankly, a very, very difficult situation to deal with. I mean, you could potentially see multiple lawsuits being filed, having to intervene to defend them, and like I said, you win, you don't get anything out of it, so it depletes resources.
Okay. That was Jorge Sanchez of MALDEF. We're going to go to
So we have the two attorneys on the panel disagreeing. Is it a floor or is it a ceiling, right? And I think, I think I've sort of made my point of view known, but I just wanted to say, even among our lawyers, we're not agreeing. Is it a floor or is it a ceiling? And it only has to be defended if someone sues. And the bottom line is, how do we really create and optimize Latino political power in this state by creating Latino districts? And I do believe we've diluted that to some extent in this state.
Okay, Ryan Blitzstein, Change, Illinois.
Well, thanks a lot for your question, Alden. I'm going to respond to that and then speak to Victor's comments. So I think it's really, really important, given the groundswell of support and movement for reforming redistricting in this state, that anyone who's interested get involved with Latino Policy Forum and Illinois Latino Agenda, which, whatever happens, whether there is another ballot initiative or whether the legislature, believe it or not, decides itself to reform redistricting and change it, I think for now, for those folks in this room, that's the best way to be aware of it. Of course, you can sign up on Change Illinois' website. I think that there's a very good shot that redistricting reform will be on the ballot in 2016 or 2018, but whether it is or not doesn't matter. What matters is that folks now are learning about the process, getting engaged, so that it's not just a last-minute let's rush and figure out what we think the map should be in our community. To Victor's point, it's funny, the Redistricting Reform Initiative Independent Maps wasn't on the ballot last November, but for some strange reason, Speaker Madigan still is fighting that campaign. They're very threatened by reform because they know that it runs counter to the interests of the machine in this state. If the particular talking point that it's somehow some kind of Republican conspiracy front is absurd when you see who was actually involved in the Independent Maps campaign. David Axelrod, obviously not someone who's a staunch Republican. The Crown family, the Pritzker family, the Joyce Foundation had funded Change Illinois, clearly a progressive funder. Adlai Stevenson, Sheila Simon, leaders in the African American and Latino community. The idea that somehow this is a partisan power grab by one part or the other is just absurd on its face based on the facts. And we can argue whether the system should change. We can argue whether one redistricting reform or another is better. We can argue whether one amendment would make things better for the Latino community. What we can't argue about is the fact that there are many, many people on both sides of the aisle and everywhere in between within communities of color throughout the state who see serious problems in terms of the way the system negatively affects communities and makes it very difficult for citizens to actually make their voices heard in Springfield and throughout the state. That's not arguable. The facts are the facts. And I think the next step is really to look at what's wrong with the current system and how it can be improved, whether it's the legislature taking action or a ballot initiative or just changes in the way the legislature and the map drawers go about the process in 2021.
Okay.
May I?
Professor Chapa, yes.
Thank you. Well, regardless of the funding for the changing redistricting initiative, it could tend to work to the benefit of Republicans. But our political system, I think we agreed at the beginning, Illinois has done better for Latinos than many other states, especially Texas, a favorite case to compare. But, people, and I work with many of my colleagues at the Institute of Government and Public Affairs, were interested and involved in that reform initiative, and they would like to see, and there's many different voices and different outcomes, but the alternative some people like is compact, square, rectangular districts drawn by computers. But look at the state of Illinois. The minority population is concentrated in Cook County and the collar counties. If you had a computer draw those districts in compact, contiguous areas, probably rectangles, preferably rectangular, you would pack all the minority vote in a few districts in Illinois and then dilute the minority voice outside the collar counties. Because blacks and Latinos are segregated in smaller areas, concentrated in smaller areas. So a Chicago district would be 99% minority, whereas a downstate district would be, 80% white, but probably majority Republican. So again, without judging the intents of this, some of these schemes could make the things worse. That is, let's let a computer do it. We have to look at how the computer is programmed because there's lots of slips between the cup and the lip in terms of the outcomes could really be different than what we have. It could be worse than what we have now in terms of Latino and black representation.
I would only add that none of the proposals on the table are saying let a computer do it, Dr. Chapa.
Okay, I think we're going to have to leave it there. That was Professor Jorge Chapa, University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. I want to thank the Latino Policy Forum for bringing this panel together. We heard a lot of different viewpoints, some expected, some unexpected, and I think it was a terrific panel and a way to keep this discussion going and moving it ahead for the years to come. Let's hear a round of applause as well for all of our panelists.